Y'all remember when Xbox inadvertently leaked like 10 years worth of their documents after the FTC case? And we got a massive insight into basically everything they've been planning for the next 10 years: platforms, marketing slogans, potential patent ideas, game release windows, all these wonderful things. The one thing we never really saw on there was Microsoft's kind of acknowledgement that they may want to start transitioning away from the hardware space, and they may not want to consider themselves a platform anymore and may instead want to consider themselves a service. Now, that wasn't actually listed out verbatim, and I don't know how many times that concept came to fruition, but there is no doubt that really in the modern era, has Xbox ever really been a dominant contender in the hardware space? They're soundly beat year after year after year by their direct competitors in PlayStation, and to a different degree, but also equally as bad for them, to the kind of indirect competition in the Nintendo Switch. So in the console space, they're not doing very good. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they can't continue to make consoles. Obviously, the company does make money. Obviously, the company does believe in the Xbox brand and vision, largely based on the fact that they just blew $68 billion on acquiring Activision Blizzard. However, it's very, very clear to everybody, and probably to Xbox, even though they may not want to admit it, that at times they may be a little over their head in the platform space. I think when Phil Spencer came on and he was predominantly a hardware guy, he brought some stability to the very flailing Xbox 360 Don Matrick Red Ring of Death era. And he did bring some very sound consoles in the Xbox One X and the Xbox One S, and then again in the Series S and again in the Series X. That's great. He also did a phenomenal job of fixing a lot of the issues that were present in the Elite Controller Series 1 and made the Elite Controller Series 2, in my opinion, even better, which I didn't honestly think that was possible. The guy's a hardware guy through and through, and that I think is the important thing. He was primarily focused on making better hardware. Unfortunately, despite his best efforts, and maybe because of the foothold that Sony has had on the market for a long time, or the nostalgia that Nintendo brings into the market, I'm not really sure which, or maybe a combination of both, Microsoft is always last place. And that's got to wear on them after a while. Yes, you're still making sales. Yes, you're still making money. But despite all the goodwill that you have brought forward, despite all those great hardware innovations that I mentioned, despite having an actual fan fest where you fly people out there and you get them hyped about the product, it's just not enough to keep up. And they're losing 3 to 1, 5 to 1, 6 to 1. You know, the numbers can be loosely interpreted depending on where consoles are sold and how they're racked and stacked. But it's just a fact, unfortunately, that Xbox is always in last place. So when I saw that the Xbox Game Pass service was starting to expand, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, when you really started to see a strong push into Samsung televisions, into the cloud, which would allow you to play it on your Apple iPad or your Android-based tablet. When you see streaming start to occur elsewhere, and you see them kind of starting to get away from, hey, you don't necessarily need this piece of plastic to play our games. Well, then the lines of what the Xbox brand is really begins to fade. And that doesn't make it bad. The market changes, the world changes. Sega, I think, is a phenomenal example of this. Sega was in the hardware space for a very, very long time. And they, for a while, were direct competition to Nintendo. And ultimately, we know what happened there. There's some phenomenal documentaries called The Console Wars, in a really good book, which kind of explain the rise and fall. But Sega is definitely not gone. Brand names that we love from Sega, notably Sonic the Hedgehog, Crazy Taxi, things like that, are still alive and well. As a matter of fact, they had a really good presentation at this year's Game Awards announcing that they're bringing a lot of their classic games back with a fresh coat of paint. I think there's like 6 or 7 classic games that are being worked on right now. So companies can absolutely transition out of the hardware space, that platform space, into more of a service base. And I honestly think that Xbox is going in that direction. Despite all the FTC leaks, despite all the FTC documentation, it seems like they're going that way. It doesn't seem like they moved the needle in the way that they wanted to, particularly in hardware, especially after hiring a guy who's known for making good hardware, who did make good hardware, who made superior hardware. They still couldn't get it done. So where does that leave them? Well, I come back to this news that there's a lot of speculation that Hi-Fi Rush is going to make its way over to the Nintendo Switch, which would announce really the first time I can think in the history of ever that a first-party studio or a first-party game is being released on another platform. It's like playing Halo on your PlayStation. That just doesn't really ring a bell. That's like playing Uncharted on your Switch, or any of these games that are iconically associated to one thing. To play that IP somewhere else seems odd. The closest we ever saw to this, of course, is Fortnite, where everybody and their mother has a character on there, where you can have multiple IP fighting it out in the virtual Fortnite world, including the Chief. But the fact that Microsoft is even teasing this, or this news is somehow, I'm not an insider, I'm just reacting to what I see. But the fact that this has been talked about now in so many different forums by so many different people, I think lends the fact that some credibility to the story. And yes, Hi-Fi Rush didn't really move the needle, I think, as much as Microsoft had wanted. And while it did have a phenomenal rating and it won an award at the Video Game Awards in December of last year, that's awesome. But I feel like that's a safe enough game that isn't really giving too much away, but it still also kind of tests the waters just to see. It's like, well, yes, this was an Xbox exclusive game. However, we're going to go ahead and give it to everyone else just to see. We're going to test the waters. Did we burn our brand down by doing this? Not really. But if it moves a lot of needles and it makes us a significant amount of money, way more money than we thought it did, well, maybe it's time for us to do this with other games. And once you start going down that route, there's really no reason that you need to invest in the piece of plastic that Xbox is selling you. You can just stay with Game Pass, which I know a lot of people said early on. The leveraging of Game Pass was a service. It was an idea that it wasn't tied down to any specific piece of hardware. Again, with the aforementioned ability to play it on Samsung televisions and to play it on the cloud, you're starting to get away from the processing that's required on the actual hardware that you would buy. You don't need an Xbox controller. You don't even need an Xbox console anymore. You just need to pay that subscription fee, and that's your entryway into the Xbox experience. Now, clearly, Microsoft is alone in this. You're not seeing PlayStation do this. You have not seen Nintendo do this. And I'm not talking about porting it to PC in a weird way for some reason. I don't understand why. But us PC master race gamers are always considered like second-class citizens, or like we don't exist. Despite the fact we're the largest market and Steam is massively larger than anything else, I don't understand why. But it's like a safe space to put your game on a computer. But if you're playing a Halo game on a Nintendo Switch, or you're playing a Halo game on a PlayStation, well, that's sacrilegious. I don't understand that. And this video isn't about that culture, that concept. That's for another day and another discussion. However, console to console content has never, ever been really something that the big three have done, with the exception of, again, going back to Sega as they dissolved. You haven't really seen that. Now, very clear here, this is not going to PlayStation. I have read that this is going to Nintendo Switch. Some people say it's a potential peace offering, or it's a sign of good faith, or it's a sign of potential things to come. I would be absolutely shocked if Nintendo reciprocates in the same way and puts a Mario game or a Rabbids game or any other the exclusive kind of IP that they own. Well, I guess Rabbids is technically Ubisoft. I was thinking the Mario versus Rabbids one, but I don't think you'd see any Nintendo IP come over. I really don't see that happening. So then the question is, why is Microsoft doing this? And it's a sign of this mythical good faith. I don't know. Microsoft has been pretty clear in the past that Game Pass will remain only on their console. It will not be accessible via other consoles, largely probably due to how online sales work and the pass-through and how much money they would actually get. And most likely other consoles would probably block access to that because they don't want you to leave their network. It's the same reason why Disney built a massive theme park in the middle of nowhere, Florida, years and years ago, because they wanted you to come into their world and stay there. And east, west, north, south, you were in Disney. All your money went to Disney. You stayed in a Disney hotel. You bought gas at a Disney gas station. You ate at a Disney restaurant. You took Disney transportation everywhere you needed to go. All the money went to them. I could not honestly see Sony saying, yeah, we'll give you access to Xbox's store on our console, because now you're taking money away from us. We didn't want you to go to them. We have our own store. We have our own games. We have our own microtransaction system. Stay inside our little sphere. And when you have a console, obviously you build that service around it, that network around it, which is designed to obviously work within that confines of that space. And that makes sense. How else do you access these digital stores if it's not for some of the mobile apps or websites? It's through their console. This makes a lot of sense. So does this mean that Xbox is really kind of on their last legs as a hardware developer? And I would say yes. And I wouldn't say yes necessarily because of this potential port from Hi-Fi Rush over. I would say, and again, despite, and this goes against everything we have read from the FCC leak and those documents there, but I've got to believe they know they're not winning, and nothing seems to be working. Nothing seems to be sticking to kind of tie that into the platform. Yes, they are selling copies of games. Yes, they are selling physical hardware, but the numbers continue to swing so farly away from them that it makes you wonder if this is that test to see kind of what would do it. I think, honestly, if I had to guess, and again, pure speculation on my part, I think the poor reception of Starfield is what broke their back. Starfield was supposed to be the game of games, the game that changed everything, changed the way it ushered Bethesda into a brave new world, billions of planets to explore. It's going to win Game of the Year. It's the most beautiful graphics. It's Todd Howard's passion project since he was 2 years old, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The game came out largely flat. It seems to have even swayed more into the negative space now rather than just neutral. And I will have a video on my updated thoughts on that game sometime later this month. But ultimately, didn't really take off. If a game like Starfield, with the amount of backing in terms of advertisement, in terms of financial support, in terms of kind of opening up the Xbox service and really ushering in that Bethesda era, right? Now, again, this game was being developed before Xbox came on board and bought out Bethesda. However, absolutely Xbox had a major say in kind of the last stretch of this game, no doubt about it. But when you look at that game like that comes out, that just failed so miserably, and their premier platform, the Xbox Series X, ran it so poorly. It kind of makes you think, maybe this isn't it for us. Maybe we should just stick to making games. We'll let other people focus on hardware. We'll let other people focus on kind of that experience, and we'll just start making games. And we'll probably make a lot more money doing it too, because we're not going to have all these issues like when you see a game release and you watch a Digital Foundry video where it runs better on a PlayStation or it runs better on a PC than it does on an Xbox. Again, going back to Phil and his vision of being the hardware guy and his experience in being hardware, delivering on a lot of those great promises, never really kind of got it over that hump and never really got it to fruition. So I would not be surprised. That's probably not going to be in 2024, But I would not be surprised if Hi-Fi Rush does release. And I wouldn't be surprised if 2025 or 2026 you start to see more games beginning to spread out. I would not, and I could be totally wrong. And if I'm wrong, that's fine. And we'll look back at this video and laugh and say what a big, fat, dumb idiot I am. But I think that's where we're going. And it's an interesting transition to see how that changes. And when you think of kind of the promises and you think of kind of the plan that you bought into when you bought your Xbox, it'll be interesting to see how Microsoft can navigate away from that. And if they do decide to navigate away from that, and how they breach the subject, and how they embrace new fans while simultaneously trying to retain some of the fans that made them who they were. We'll have to see how the story evolves. This is a very, very interesting one, but I wanted to do this video because I felt like it was something that needed to be discussed. And I definitely see this as a massive, massive momentum shift in Microsoft's strategy. And again, you could look at this and say, wow, you're really making a mountain out of a molehill. Hi-Fi Rush isn't nearly as important of a game as we thought. It's just a single game. What is all the hype about? I think this is a lot of testing the water. But the fact that you had such a massive company even consider that, I think speaks volumes. Again, when have you ever seen some of those premier platform games ever even being remotely discussed on being played on enemy consoles? You just haven't. So this will be interesting to see how it plays out. And especially for a guy like me who loves a lot of Xbox brands like Forza and Halo and Gears, I'd be very curious to see what this does to that competitive scene. I'd be very curious to see what this does to the player base. And I'd be very curious to see how this evolves the platform potentially in the future, because that has a lot of implications in of itself. So I'll wrap up this video now. I know I'm a little long. I try to keep it about 10 or 11 minutes, but I thought this was an important enough topic to kind of talk through. I'm back, baby. More videos coming this week. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care of yourselves. And until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.